What happens when one of the most famous women in the world sits down for what should be a simple interview and things spiral completely out of control? In just 35 seconds, a single comment turns a civil conversation into an absolute disaster that ends with security escorting a guest off one of television's most respected programs. This is the story of how Meghan Markle's appearance on 60 Minutes became one of the most shocking moments in broadcast history. Anderson Cooper has been doing this for decades. He's interviewed presidents, world leaders, celebrities, and everyone in between. He's known for being calm, measured, and respectful. He asks tough questions, sure, but he does it with grace. That's why when Meghan Markle's team reached out for an interview, the 60 Minutes producers didn't think twice. It seemed like a perfect match, a high-profile guest with a lot to say, and a trusted journalist who could handle any conversation with professionalism. The interview was set. The studio was prepared. Cameras were positioned perfectly. The lighting was tested and retested. Everything was ready for what everyone assumed would be a compelling but civil conversation. Anderson had his notes prepared. His questions were thoughtful, designed to let Meghan share her perspective, while also addressing some of the controversies that had followed her over the years. Nothing unusual, nothing out of bounds, just good journalism. When Meghan walked onto the set, she seemed confident. She smiled for the cameras, shook Anderson's hand, and settled into her chair. The crew did their final checks. Sound levels were good. The cameras were rolling. Anderson started with a warm welcome, thanking Meghan for joining him. She smiled and said it was her pleasure to be there. So far, everything was going exactly as planned. Anderson eased into the conversation with some lighter questions. How was she doing? What had she been working on lately? Meghan answered smoothly, talking about various projects and causes she cared about. She seemed relaxed, even enjoying herself. The first 10 minutes were perfectly pleasant, but then Anderson began to shift into more substantive territory. That's when the temperature in the room started to change. He asked about some of the criticisms she'd faced over the years. Nothing aggressive, just a straightforward question about how she dealt with public scrutiny. Meghan's expression tightened slightly. Her answer became more defensive. She talked about how unfair the media had been, how she'd been misunderstood, how people didn't know the real story. Anderson nodded, listening carefully. He followed up by asking if she could understand why some people might have different perspectives on certain situations. It was a fair question, a balanced question, the kind of question any good journalist would ask. That's when Meghan's tone really shifted. She sat up straighter in her chair and said, "I don't think you're listening to what I'm actually saying, Anderson." There was an edge to her voice now. Anderson, ever the professional, kept his composure. He calmly said he was listening very carefully and was simply trying to explore all sides of the story. Meghan shook her head and said, "That's the problem. You're treating this like there are two sides when there's only the truth, and the truth is what I'm telling you." Anderson paused. He's experienced enough to know when a conversation is starting to go sideways. He tried to reset things. He said he respected her truth and wanted to give her every opportunity to share it, but that his job was also to ask questions that his audience might be wondering about. Meghan cut him off. "Your audience," she said, her voice rising slightly, "has been fed lies about me for years. Maybe instead of asking me to defend myself, you should be asking why your industry, your profession, has been so willing to destroy people's lives for ratings." The crew in the studio exchanged glances. This was getting uncomfortable. Anderson remained calm. He acknowledged that media criticism was valid and important, and said he was happy to discuss it. But he also gently pointed out that she had agreed to do this interview, and that meant engaging with difficult questions. That's when Meghan said something that made everyone in the room tense up. "You know what, Anderson? I thought you were different. I thought you, of all people, would understand what it's like to be targeted, to be misunderstood, to have your truth questioned, but you're just like the rest of them. You're sitting there in your comfortable chair, with your comfortable job, asking me to explain myself like I'm the problem, like I'm the one who needs to justify my existence. Anderson took a breath. His voice remained steady. I'm not asking you to justify your existence. I'm asking you to talk about your experiences, which is what we agreed you'd do when you accepted this invitation. It was a perfectly reasonable response, but Meghan wasn't having it. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Anderson. Do you know what it's like to have the entire world pick apart every single thing you do? Every word you say? Every choice you make? Do you know what that does to a person? Anderson, who has reported from war zones and covered some of the most difficult stories in journalism, responded calmly. I think many people face intense scrutiny in different ways. I'm interested in hearing about your specific experience. Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. My specific experience? My specific experience is that I've been treated like a criminal for having opinions, for standing up for myself, for not just smiling and nodding and playing the part everyone wanted me to play. Anderson nodded and said, I understand that's how you feel. That word, feel, seemed to light a fuse. Meghan's face flushed. How I feel. How I feel. This isn't about feelings, Anderson. This is about facts. This is about a system that chews people up and spits them out, and you're part of that system, whether you want to admit it or not. Anderson maintained his professional demeanor. I think we can have a productive conversation about media, about public life, about all of these issues, but I need you to engage with the questions I'm asking rather than attacking me personally. It was a fair boundary to set. Any journalist would have done the same, but Meghan saw it differently. Attacking you? She said, her voice getting louder. You think I'm attacking you? You have no idea what a real attack looks like. You sit here in your studio, safe and protected, while people like me are out there being destroyed every single day. And now you want to play the victim because I'm not being nice enough. Because I'm not grateful enough that you've given me this platform? The producers in the control room were getting nervous. This was spiraling. Anderson tried once more to bring things back. Nobody is playing the victim. I'm trying to have a conversation. If you're not comfortable continuing, we can stop. It was a generous offer, an easy exit. But Meghan didn't take it. Instead, she stood up. Oh, we're stopping. But not because you're giving me permission. We're stopping because this is exactly what I knew would happen. I come here in good faith, trying to share my story, and I get interrogated like I'm on trial. Well, I'm done. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with people like you pretending to care about the truth while you're really just looking for your next headline. Anderson remained seated. His voice was still calm. I'm sorry you feel that way. I was hoping we could have a meaningful dialogue. Meghan grabbed her microphone and started pulling it off. A meaningful dialogue? You wouldn't know a meaningful dialogue if it hit you in the face. You know what your problem is, Anderson? You're so used to people being intimidated by you, so used to people playing along with your little games, that when someone actually stands up and tells you the truth, you can't handle it. Anderson finally showed a flicker of something. Not anger, but firmness. I've been nothing but respectful to you since you arrived. I've asked you fair questions. If you want to leave, that's your choice. But don't mischaracterize what's happened here. That seemed to push Meghan over the edge. Respectful? You call this respectful? You're a joke, Anderson. This whole thing is a joke. And you know what? People are going to hear about this. They're going to hear about how you treated me, how you tried to trap me, how you showed your true colors. She turned to the crew. I hope you all are proud of yourselves. I hope you're proud of working for someone who treats guests like this. One of the producers stepped onto the set, trying to de-escalate. Meghan, please, let's take a moment. But Meghan wasn't interested in taking a moment. She pointed at Anderson. You don't deserve the platform you have. You don't deserve the respect people give you. You're nothing but a puppet for a corrupt system, and I see right through you." Anderson stood up now. His patience, which had been remarkable up to this point, was clearly being tested. "I think we're done here. Thank you for coming." His voice was firm, but not cruel. Professional to the end. But Meghan wasn't finished. "Oh, we're done? Now you want to end it? After you've gotten what you wanted? After you've provoked me and pushed me and tried to make me look bad? This is going to blow up in your face, Anderson. Mark my words. People are going to see this for what it is." She was moving toward the edge of the set now, but she kept turning back to fire off more comments. "You think you're so smart. You think you're so untouchable, but you're not. None of you are. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happened here today." Anderson didn't respond. He simply stood there, watching as Meghan continued her tirade. The producers were trying to guide her off the set, but she resisted. "Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. I'll leave when I'm ready to leave." She turned back to Anderson one more time. "You're going to regret this. You're going to regret treating me like this. Because I have a voice, and I'm going to use it. And people actually listen to me, unlike you, who people only watch because they have nothing better to do." It was at this point that security was quietly called. Not because Meghan was being physically aggressive, but because the situation had become untenable. She wasn't leaving voluntarily, and she was continuing to disrupt the production. When the security personnel arrived, Meghan's eyes went wide. "Are you serious right now? You're calling security on me? This is unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable." Anderson, to his credit, tried one last time. "Meghan, I think it's best if we all just take a step back. This doesn't have to end this way." But Meghan was beyond reason now. "This is ending exactly the way it was always going to end, Anderson. With you showing the world who you really are. A coward. A fraud. Someone who pretends to care about truth, but really just cares about ratings and making yourself look good." The security team gently but firmly began escorting her toward the exit. She continued talking the entire way. "Everyone's going to hear about this. This is going to be everywhere. You think you can treat people like this and get away with it? You think you can just throw me out like I'm nothing? I'm not nothing, Anderson. I'm somebody, and you just made the biggest mistake of your career." As she was led off the set, her voice could still be heard echoing through the studio. "This isn't over. This is far from over. You have no idea what you've just done." And then, finally, she was gone. The studio fell silent. The crew stood there, stunned. Anderson sat back down in his chair, composed, but clearly processing what had just happened. He looked at the camera, then at the producers. "Well," he said quietly, "that was unexpected." It was perhaps the understatement of the year. In all his years of journalism, through all the difficult interviews and tense moments, Anderson had never experienced anything quite like that. He'd remained professional throughout, asking fair questions, setting reasonable boundaries, and treating his guest with respect, even as she hurled accusations and insults at him. The crew began to pack up, moving slowly, still in disbelief at what they'd just witnessed. Producers huddled together, trying to figure out what to do with the footage. Some of it would air, certainly. The public had a right to know what happened. But how much? How do you broadcast something like that without it looking like you're trying to embarrass your guest, even when your guest had embarrassed herself? Anderson gathered his notes, his expression thoughtful. Someone asked if he was okay. He nodded. "I'm fine. That's part of the job sometimes." But everyone could tell it had rattled him. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because it's never pleasant to be on the receiving end of that kind of hostility, especially when it's undeserved. What had started as a standard interview had turned into something else entirely. Not because of anything Anderson had done, but because his guest had come in with an agenda that had nothing to do with honest conversation. She'd wanted to control the narrative completely, and when she realized that wasn't going to happen, when she understood that she'd be asked to engage with perspectives beyond her own, she'd lashed out. The most telling part of the whole exchange was how Anderson had handled it. He never raised his voice. He never insulted her. He never tried to humiliate her. He simply did his job, asked his questions, and maintained his boundaries. When she attacked him, he didn't attack back. When she accused him of being part of some corrupt system, he didn't take the bait. He remained the professional that he's always been, and in the end, that contrast told the whole story. On one side, you had a journalist trying to do his job with integrity. On the other, you had someone who couldn't handle being asked questions she didn't want to answer. Someone who expected deference and got journalism instead. Someone who confused respect with agreement and lost control when she didn't get her way. The aftermath in the studio was quiet. People spoke in hushed tones. There was a sense of witnessing something that would be talked about for a long time. Not because it was good television in the traditional sense, but because it revealed something important about how public figures expect to be treated versus how journalists need to treat them. Anderson has interviewed countless people who've been through difficult times, who faced criticism, who felt misunderstood, and most of them, even when disagreeing with his questions, managed to engage respectfully. They understand that an interview is a dialogue, not a monologue. They understand that a journalist's job is to ask questions, not to simply provide a platform for unchallenged statements. But every once in a while, someone comes along who doesn't understand that, or who understands it but rejects it entirely. Someone who believes their perspective is so obviously correct that any questioning of it is an attack. Someone who sees disagreement as disrespect and boundaries as betrayal. And when that happens, when someone like that sits down for an interview expecting to be treated like royalty and instead gets treated like everyone else, things can go very wrong very quickly. That's what happened in that studio. A collision between someone who expected special treatment and someone who was committed to treating everyone the same way, regardless of their status or fame. Anderson Cooper has built his career on fairness, on asking the questions that need to be asked, on pushing back when necessary, but always with respect. He didn't change his approach for Meghan Markle, and that's exactly what made her so angry. She wanted sympathy without scrutiny. She wanted a platform without accountability. She wanted to tell her story without having to engage with anyone else's perspective. And when she didn't get that, when she realized that even a sympathetic journalist like Anderson would still ask challenging questions, she couldn't handle it. Instead of rising to the occasion, she lashed out. Instead of making her case with grace and persuasiveness, she resorted to personal attacks and dramatic exits. The whole thing lasted less than 30 minutes from start to finish. 30 minutes that revealed more about both parties than hours of careful conversation might have. It showed Anderson Cooper at his best, maintaining his composure and his principles even under personal attack. And it showed Meghan Markle at her worst, unable to handle the basic expectations of public discourse, demanding respect while showing none, and ultimately self-destructing in spectacular fashion. When people watched the footage that eventually aired, they saw exactly what happened. They saw a professional doing his job, and a guest who couldn't handle it. They saw reasonable questions met with unreasonable hostility. They saw someone try to maintain a conversation, and someone else do everything possible to destroy it. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. This is what happens when someone confuses fame with authority, when they believe their pain gives them the right to attack others, when they think that being a victim in one context means they can't be wrong in any context. This is what happens when entitlement meets accountability and can't accept the encounter. This is what happens when someone walks into an interview thinking they're owed deference and discovers that journalism doesn't work that way. Anderson Cooper will go on to do thousands more interviews. He'll sit across from presidents and prime ministers, activists and actors, heroes and villains. And he'll treat them all the same way he treated Meghan Markle. With respect but not reverence. With interest but not blind acceptance. With professionalism that never wavers regardless of how his guests behave. That's what makes him good at what he does. As for what happened in that studio, it stands as a reminder that even the most carefully planned interviews can go completely off the rails when one party refuses to engage in good faith. It's a reminder that maintaining composure in the face of hostility is a skill, and one that Anderson has mastered. And it's a reminder that sometimes the most revealing moments in television aren't the ones that go according to plan, but the ones where everything falls apart and people show exactly who they are under pressure. The lights in the studio eventually went dark. The cameras were packed away. The set was cleared. But what happened there that day would be replayed and discussed and analyzed for years to come. Not as an example of great television, but as an example of what happens when someone's sense of self-importance collides with the basic requirements of honest dialogue. And in that collision, there was a clear winner. It was the person who kept his cool, maintained his integrity, and refused to sink to the level of personal attacks even when provoked. It was the person who understood that his job wasn't to make his guest comfortable, but to ask the questions that needed asking. It was the person who walked away with his dignity intact, while his guest walked away having lost hers entirely.